Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about the books that I read in the second half of February. I'm not gonna lie, the second half of February in terms of reading was kind of a bit patchy. I had one DNF and I had a couple of books that I didn't really love, but thankfully Anne of Green Gables did come to save the reading month, but more about that later. As I've started doing as of late, I am going to be going in order of my preference for these books, how much I liked them, so we're going to start off with the DNF. And unfortunately, the book I ended up DNFing this month was actually the book club pick for the I Should Have Read That book club, and that was Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. This is set in a kind of dystopian alternate reality in which women naturally no longer exist. And so in order for life to continue, technology has advanced to the stage where we can create women robots that are perfectly formed, beautiful creatures. These girls are manufactured and they are sent to schools in order to be the most appealing, the most beautiful, the most compliant to the men. There's this intense atmosphere of comparison, particularly in terms of looks. The girls that do well can be chosen as companions, whereas those girls who are left behind and not chosen as companions end up being concubines or teachers or maybe something worse. It's a really interesting concept, and maybe the issues that I took with this book were completely deliberate. I think they were, but I just could not stomach all of the body image issues, all of the body shaming that was going on in this book. I've considered myself, especially in recent years, to be somebody who is fairly body positive. If not body confident, then definitely pretty positive about my body, about how I look. But reading this just took me back to being 16 years old and absolutely hating myself. Just incessant references to calorie counting, these girls counting to 0.1 of a calorie, how your weight has to be inside this pound range that is very, very restricted. And they give numbers for all of this, which I don't know, just mess with my brain a bit. And it just made me really uncomfortable to read, and not in a way that was making me really think about things. It made me sad and have very negative thoughts, and I thought that I was past all of those. I'm generally not a person who does get very bothered by things that I read. I can handle hard topics in books really well usually, but this just it did not work for me. It made me so uncomfortable to read. So unfortunately, this is going to be the first book from the I Should Have Read That book club that I am not going to be finishing. And whilst the point of this book is definitely that this comparison is really, really harmful, I feel like Louise O'Neill could have gone another way in being explicit about this, because I feel like if I were a teenager, I could have been really negatively impacted by reading some of these descriptions. I also just generally didn't love the writing style in here. I felt like everything was very, very heavy-handed. I felt like what I was craving with this was more subtlety, a bit more nuance, and I just wasn't really getting that from this book, and it was bothering me. I don't need to read that. I don't need to. Next up, we have Great Goddesses, Life Lessons from Myths and Monsters by Nikita Gill. This is a poetry collection. As the title suggests, it is very much geared towards Greek myth and Greek myth retelling. I feel like from the title, you'd get the sense that it's a very woman-focused narrative, which, it is. Women are definitely featured, but I wouldn't say that this is entirely female-focused. There are definitely poems that feature on the men of Greek mythology as well. This was an interesting one. It's definitely one that I'm glad that I've read. There were definitely poems in here that I did dog-ear and keep for later, for flicking back to. I think my favourite section of poems here were the poems that were between Demeter, Persephone and Hades. I felt like the emotions in those poems were really raw. You feel a whole range of emotions through this. You've definitely got Demeter's fury and her sorrow at the loss of her daughter, but also she's definitely portraying the relationship of Persephone and Hades as romantic and consensual. This one is Demeter to Hades, a mother's fury. You smell of death. Everything about you is an endless goodbye. I will give this union no blessings, not when even your presence will harm my fey daughter. She is a child of flora, of fauna, of fruit, too gentle for your hell. You overestimate yourself here in the land of the harvest, daring to return to ask me for my most precious thing, what you stole. Beware, King of Death, for I am the queen of the living, and this deified land's roots will hold you forever in place, if I say a word to will it. From Persephone to Demeter, do you remember what happened the first time I touched a pomegranate shrub? Instead of bursting to a full red fruit, it wilted and mottled under my fingers until you snatched it and brought it back to life. We both knew in that moment I nurtured something in my chest you couldn't bring yourself to love. So you kept me hidden, deep in a forest where no one could find me. The darkness and ugliness festering under this, my pretty nymph skin. But Mama, he found me. He saw me nourish this beast in the woods. He fell in love with the part of me that no one else could. Promise me a land where I could be a queen and not another version of you. A place where I could unleash my flaws and fury without having to disappoint you. They told you they could bring me back to you to pacify your anger, so you could bring back the spring. They needed you to remind the birds to sing, but Mama, you gave birth to a girl who knows her own mind. He didn't snatch me and take me to hell. I went there because I wanted a queendom destined to be mine. There are some really beautiful moments in this. However, I wouldn't say that I loved it from beginning to end. There are definitely moments with this, and I have it with a lot of modern poetry where I'm kind of like, is this poetry or is this just a collection of words that you strung together? There are moments in here where I feel like the poems are basically just lists, just random lists of thoughts and just kind of sticking it to a god's name. That's me probably just not understanding poetry. I'm fine with that. I think if you are already very much into your Greek mythology, then this is definitely one that you should check out. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone. Next up, we have Pandora by Susan Stokes-Chapman. This is historical fiction taking place in 1799. We are following the character of Dora Blake. She's an orphan being looked after by her quite nefarious uncle and living in what was her parents' shop of antiquities. However, many years have passed since their deaths and it has kind of run into disrepute. Dora's uncle is not taking care of the shop as it should be. Rather than a shop that is selling treasured items, it's definitely just become a collection of fakes, which her uncle is desperate to just sell off. He doesn't seem to have the same care and love for these antiquities that Pandora's parents did and that she herself has. He's also a pretty verbally abusive man, and she's always worried that it's going to escalate to becoming physically abusive. She knows that her uncle doesn't love her and that he doesn't want to have to take care of her, so she is determined to make a name for herself and to support herself, which she does by aspiring to become a jewellery designer. There's also a second perspective of young Edward, who is an antiquarian scholar who is desperate to join this guild of antiquities, desperate to progress his academic career. The plot really kicks off when Pandora's uncle ends up taking a shipment which contains this very mysterious jar. This jar that was very expensive and hard to procure by the uncle, and this jar of vase has been reported to cause very terrible effects to the men who were carrying it. Dora thinks this shipment is going to be helpful in her aspirations as a jeweller, using the designs of this vase to be able to inspire a Grecian line of jewellery, which at the time is very fashionable and which people are demanding. Meanwhile, Edward thinks it's going to be a unique thing that he can study, with the paper being something that he can submit to the guild. All of the work that they're wanting to do with this vase is having to be done in private, as Dora's uncle would not be happy if he found out what they were doing. And much mystery and intrigue goes from there. This was one of my most anticipated books for this quarter, and I'm definitely glad that I read it. It was really interesting to read historical fiction that also brings in a bit of Greek myth retelling. That is a kind of Greek myth retelling that I've not come across. I usually either see things that are completely contemporary to today or something that is retelling the myth and setting it in its original context. I feel like I liked the concept of this book maybe a little bit more than the execution. I think the writing was fine. I didn't find it anything spectacular, and I think these characters, whilst they definitely have something to them, were not the most endearing. I like the fact that Dora is a little bit quirky. You know, she has a magpie as a pet. You know, she has interests and passions and hobbies. But I felt like I was rooting for her because of the situation she was in rather than her own personality. I felt like I was rooting for these two characters to do well more because the other characters around them are kind of horrible. And I just didn't want to see them in that situation rather than feeling like, lovable characters that I really want to do well. Yay. And that's always going to hold books back for me. There was also a character who is introduced later on in the book who is this very wealthy woman who's very extravagant and she wants to be the most fashionable woman in society, and I found all of her dialogue to be so cringy and very stereotypical. "Do you know who I am?" she returns, her voice now laden with scorn, but she doesn't wait for his response. "I am a woman who desires ostentation, to excite my dearest friends and invite envy in those who are not. I need to be the talk of the town, the belle of the ball. It is what I live for." I mean, extravagant, yes. Believable as a character, not really. You know, I was engaged with this book whilst I was reading it, but it's not really one that stuck with me a couple of weeks on. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the two books in the Anne of Green Gables series that I read, which were books 4 and 5, at least in the chronology of Anne's life, rather than publication order anyway. So with that, we have Anne of Windy Willows, alternatively known as Anne of Windy Poplars, and Anne's House of Dreams. And once again, I'm stuck in this position where I want to tell you what they're about, but I can't without spoiling the rest of the series. But as with the other Anne of Green Gables books, I found these absolutely charming and delightful and just... I'd been told previously that Anne of Windy Willows is meant to be, you know, one of the lesser loved books in this series. It is partially an epistolary, I hope I said that right, book where she is writing letters to someone, not going to say who because that's a spoiler, and it's just generally recounting her life in this kind of interim period where we know something is going to happen but it's not going to happen yet and I can't say any more about it. And I think if you were reading this and you know what this is building up to and you know what this book is leading up to, this can be one that you're maybe a little bit impatient to get through, and I completely understand that, but I still found it very charming. This, however, I definitely think is my favourite of the two. The thing that we've been waiting to happen does happen, and it's great. And also what I loved about this is you're meeting so many new characters and they are all just as charming and lovely as the previous characters that we've met in Anne of Green Gables, but all in different ways. They've all got these very distinct personalities. Some of them have sad, tragic backstories. There's intrigue, there's emotion. Something very, very sad happens in this book and I was not prepared for it. I feel like this one is a little bit more stable, a little bit more grounded. This one gives you a lot more emotion, but I'm very attached to these characters and that's what I was looking for. So far from the Anne of Green Gables books that I've read, I would probably say that number 1 is still my favourite. And then I feel like maybe number 5 or number 3, Anne of the Island, are kind of competing for my second place spot. Then I would put number 2 and then I would put number 4. But all of these books are fantastic. They're all like 4-star and above for me. So yeah, I think from the main books, I now just have Anne of Ingleside to read. And then there's like books 7, 8 and 9, which are kind of more like supplementary. They focus on different characters other than Anne. Definitely ones that I'd want to check out, but the main 6 are my priorities for right now. And I'm looking forward to getting to that 6th book. So there we go, those are all of the books that I finished off February reading. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, let me know about anything that you read at the end of February. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.